after last night. If the Australian I took home, oh that doesn't sound right, if the Australian I dropped off at his house is anything to go by, there are going to be some very seedy people today. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning up. So if you are at the back and you are eating, feel free to bring those plates down. Just drop them underneath your chairs quietly when you're finished and we'll collect them up at the end of the session. And just remember, we can ask questions. Felicity is more than happy to answer any and all questions, and you can ask those through that slido.com app, through the app INZ 2018. I'll remind you of the hashtags later on in the morning. Although, actually, I'll do it now because there might be some tech people who are on Twitter or Facebook. Remember, if you are commenting on this, the hashtag INZ 2018 Facebook and tag in Irrigation NZ, and likewise on Facebook as well and Twitter. Right, that's enough. So, Felicity Turner. Hello, Felicity Turner. Hello. She is speaking on digital ag transformation from hype to reality. She's from the Yield. She has a diverse entrepreneurial background. Thrives on creating transformative digital technologies and delivering a memorable product experience. That's very tech. Responsible for sales, marketing, support and services at the Yield. She works with top-tier irrigated crop growers to ensure existing products solve real on-farm challenges while collaborating with growers and scoping and developing new products. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure for this breakfast session to welcome Felicity Turner.
Right, good morning. Can everyone hear me? Yes? Nods? Good. I'm going to start by just preparing everybody that I've done in the last 4 weeks 2 trips to the US, 1 trip to Sydney when I live in Melbourne, and come here as well. So I think my body has hit the wall last night and I'm medicated up, so I'll try and be as exciting as I can. But that's actually just my excuse for not being as funny as the mayor. When you had to, I was so glad I didn't have to actually present straight after him yesterday. And I heard he was a bit of a hoot last night as well. So, jumping into it, digital ag transformation. Excuse me. So a little bit about us before we start and kind of, why I can talk on the topic from an ag perspective. The Yield is an ag tech startup company, or startup, we actually have to stop using that term. We've been around for coming up to 3.5 years now. We released our agricultural product commercially in October of last year, but we've had our aquaculture product out in market for coming up to 2 years. And continually evolving our products as we go. About me, so I have worked not in ag for most of my career, so I've only been at the Yield for 18 months, working in agriculture, obviously, but before that I worked for Microsoft for around 6 years, where I did digital transformation for multiple companies. So my kind of, sweet spot is looking at how business is done today, how a business needs to transform, and then how technology can help it do that, as opposed to just saying, oh, here's technology, use it, and, kind of just keep doing things the same way. So what is digital transformation? I always find it's easier to say what it's not up front. So what isn't digital transformation? Basically, it's not technology for technology's sake. I apologise, some of you will hear some of the same stories because I've spoken to a few of you. But an example for technology's sake is for a soil moisture probe, say. If we put soil moisture probes everywhere, that's great. We can actually see what the soil moisture reading is at that point or location, but can I do anything about it differently? So if I'm putting 4 soil moisture probes into one crop, can I irrigate differently for those different soil moisture readings? If I can't, there's no point in putting the 4 of them in there. I'm better off putting in the one in the location that gives me the average or the 80% of what that crop actually does. So just throwing technology for technology's sake doesn't actually help us or doesn't help us transform how we do things. It's not doing the same thing digitally. Have a great example of, when we created our product, we spent 2 years on farm with growers before we even developed anything. So we were trying to work out what do growers do, what data are they using, how are they using that data to make decisions, what is the process that they go through each day, so what's their logical workflow. So we spent, as I said, around 2 years on farm with growers. One of the things that we saw in that time was one of our growers, writing on the window with a whiteboard marker of his tractor, filling in what he'd sprayed that day, and the list was growing, and our business analyst said, why are you writing it there? He goes, when the window fills up, I take a picture of it, and then I take that and write it down, enter it into my computer later. And it's like, we had a chuckle and said, well, it's kind of digital transformation. He's using a camera to take a picture of it, but he's still not transforming his business, right? He's actually adding another step in the process as well. So it's not doing the same thing digitally. It's working out, yes, doing things digitally can help do it faster, but is it helping us do it better or think smarter about it? It's also not the replacement of human knowledge or interaction. One of the big things, everyone gets worried about when digital transformation is spoken about in an organisation, more so than in agriculture, but, am I going to lose my job? Is it just going to replace what I'm doing? And it should never be that. It should be about, yes, we might do things differently. Has my microphone just changed? We might do things differently, and we might then be able to repurpose or have more time to do better things with different outcomes, as opposed to doing the tactical, repetitive tasks in there. So what is digital transformation then? It's the use of technology to enhance how we do things today. And there's always three main outcomes that we're trying to achieve. The first one is to increase our outputs or revenues. So we either want to produce more, we want to increase our revenues, we want to do things better. We also want to reduce our inputs and reduce our costs. So, if it's not reducing the spend that we have, then it's probably not going to be worthwhile. And we also want to do it for productivity gains. We want to do things better and differently so that we're actually achieving more in the day. But it's also a massive opportunity. It's an opportunity not just to say, I'm going to replace writing it on my tractor windscreen, I'm going to enter it into my phone, and then I'm still going to then have to transcribe it into Excel. It's not about doing that, maybe taking one step out of the process. It's about, how do I actually record it once and then have it populate everywhere else or integrate into my other systems? So it's an opportunity to look at how we do things today, what we want to achieve. And this is what I always say to organisations: what is it you actually want to achieve? What's the problem you're trying to solve? And then let's work out what technology actually suits. So for an example, I was going to talk about Cricket Australia, but I think there's probably taboo at the moment with their recent history, so I'm not going to tell you about them. Everybody know Webjet, online booking? Now, I know it's a completely different industry, but this is part of the process as well, right? It's understanding it's not just about your industry and your knowledge and doing things the same way. It's about looking at other businesses and how they do things and how they transform. So I had the great opportunity to work with Webjet when they were looking at how they were going to redefine their business, because there's so many online booking tools now for plane rides and accommodation, etc. It's getting very, very competitive. The margins are getting much smaller. So how do you retain a competitive edge in that process? And one of the things they looked at was how they actually transact buying the, say, hotel rooms for themselves. So what happens is you might have the Hyatt releases 1,000 rooms discount for wholesale. Then you might have 3 buyers that buy those 1,000 seats, and then they either sell directly to the public or they on-sell to somebody else. And so all along the way, they're buying and selling at a different price. Until recently, the majority of them still did it manually via fax. And so I don't know if any of you have ever turned up on one of those bookings to a hotel and they said, I'm sorry, we don't actually have a booking for you. It's happened to me, it's happened to the Webjet staff, and it's because the transactions get lost along the way. Now, it's not just about customer dissatisfaction, it's actually about lost revenue, because if along the way the buy-sell doesn't happen, then I've lost my money because there's no transaction record of it. So what they looked at was how could they digitise this, but they could digitise it for themselves, but how could they influence the rest of the industry? And so has anybody here heard of blockchain? Yep, a few hands. Great throw around, the technology, Bitcoin, all that kind of stuff. Great technology for technology's sake. I've got a solution on it, but don't really know how to use it. Well, they came up with the first commercial solution. So we worked together to say, if we create this process and we invite all of the global buyers and sellers into this, and we have a digital record of the transaction along the way, then nobody's going to lose their money. The transactions are reconciled by the second. It was billions of dollars of savings for the industry. So it was not just about a technology, but it was like, what's the problem, how could we solve it, and how can we solve it on a bigger scale and do it differently overall? And that's kind of what we've done with agriculture and irrigation at the Yield. So to tell you how we got to ag and how we started, again, transformation is not about getting it right the first time, and it's not about actually probably doing what your end goal is the first time around. So the first thing that we looked at was transforming the oyster industry. So I have learned a lot about oysters since I have joined the Yield, and the biggest thing about oysters, it is one of the most highly regulated food industries because oysters are filter feeders, and so if there's contaminants in the water that they're eating from, then they are contaminated. They can then flush that once they get clean water again, but it takes a certain period of time to do that. So what was happening in industry in Australia was there's the state regulators and then there's the growers, and the state regulators would take readings from the BOM, from the Bureau Meteorology Towers, could be 20, 50 kilometres away from where the growers were, and they would take a rain reading from there and say, oh, we've had X mils of rain, therefore you've probably got contaminants in the water because you've got runoff, and so therefore we're going to close you for harvesting. So the first issue is they're being closed on rainfall that could be 20 kilometres away, which means they might not have got rainfall, but they got closed on an event that happened 20 kilometres away. The second issue with it is the way that the regulatory body works is they send a list of closures for the day to a set of people, regulators, and they hop in a car and they drive down and they literally physically raise a red flag and say, you can't harvest today. So there's this productivity, overhead of having to physically drive there and raise this flag. Then what happens, they have to wait for a certain period of time of no rain and certain conditions before they're allowed to reopen that harvest area. And again, it's done physically. Whilst the regulators rush there to close it, because obviously they don't want to put contaminated oysters out into the market, they're not so rushed to get there to open again because, they've got other things to do. So they might actually be closed for an extra day or two by the time the regulator gets there, drives up, lowers the red flag, raises the green flag. So that was the second problem that we had there. So what we did was say, well, okay, the problem is about getting information to you that's accurate about that estuary, but also being able to do something about it quickly so that, it's open when it's open and it's closed when it's closed, and we have as few closures as possible that aren't required. So we looked at putting sensing stations into the water to measure salinity. So the government bodies agreed that salinity was a good proxy for rainfall because salinity, if it drops, if you've got rainfall, it drops. And so therefore you can pretty much guarantee you've had runoff come into the estuary itself. So that was the first thing, policy change, that we could use salinity as a proxy. And then secondly, how do we actually, build a system that allows both the regulator and the grower to see that salinity reading. So we created apps for the growers and we created a dashboard for the regulators. And so what happens is now the salinity readings go into the regulator's dashboard, they get notifications and alerts, they then either open or close if they agree with it. The grower then receives a notification in their app, so now they're closed or open digitally via the app on the phone, so they know straight away. And then as soon as the level gets back to what it needs to be, it automatically gets triggered again back at the regulators. They open or close, say yes, we'll allow it open, and it's automatically open again. So there's huge productivity gains for the regulator. They don't have to have people driving backwards and forwards just to raise and lower flags. They provide a better service to their customers, so their customers much happier. And the growers only get closed when they should be closed. But then we actually took it a step further with them and said, what if we could predict the salinity for you? What if we could predict that it was going to drop? Or we could give you insight 3 to 5 days ahead. So what we did was build a whole platform that allowed us to do predictions to say, tell me what the weather's going to be for the next 3 days, tell me what the rainfall's going to be for the next 3 days, therefore tell me what the salinity is likely to be for the next 3 days. So then what the growers were able to do is see if an event was going to come up in the next 3 days, and they could harvest early. So even if they knew that the event was going to happen, a massive rainfall which would end up closing them, or the salinity was dropping slowly because there'd been steady rain, they could get their produce out and they could go and sell it or put it into another location. So it gave them, massive risk mitigation from that perspective. And then the final thing was just being able to schedule staff better. So because we also predict the tide and all that for them, with much more accuracy. So we're above 95% accuracy in most cases for oysters because the predictions have been running for that long. They can now predict, when is the best window to get their people in to go and do the harvesting for them. So lots and lots of benefits. But this was the first step of transformation. Like I said, we've actually transformed that industry and how they do things, and we're continuing to build in it to put in predictions for disease and all sorts of things in there so that, they're getting more value from it and again, more of a risk mitigation tool for them. But everything we built here is then, wow, we can do this in agriculture now because we know how to do predictions, we know how to do hardware that sits in salt water in the roaring 40s in Tasmania and it survives, so we can do it the same in agriculture. So again, transformation is not just stopping once you've solved one problem, it's like how many more problems can we actually solve as we go forward? And so, excuse me, so what we've done is take the same technologies, the same platform, the same set of algorithms, but built more of them and reconfigured for what growers want, which is looking at different problems in irrigation. And again, not just stopping at the first problem that we're solving. So in this instance, we have hardware that sits on farm. Now, most growers, in fact, every single grower that I have met has a set of sensors, hardware, sitting in their shed that they have put in, they've spent money on, they either couldn't get it working, they either, they got it working but then it stopped working and then they had nobody to come and fix it, so they put it away. And again, this is technology for technology's sake, right? They had a belief that if they put this hardware on the ground and they could see this data, that, it would do something for them. But the reality was it was just another set of data being pushed at them. The hardware didn't always work, it didn't always connect to the internet, so therefore they didn't always get their data streams. So again, it's not about, just technology for technology's sake. Again, it's about how do we create a solution that's solving a problem. And so again, this was really unique of sitting back and saying, well, hang on, what is it that growers want to achieve? What is it that they want to see? What's the problem that we can solve for them? And as I said, 2 years of working on farm with growers, it's one of the things from my perspective is you don't have to understand an industry, you just have to be compassionate and empathetic and have a good listening ear to understand what are the problems that people are doing, how do they do their jobs today, what are the pain points that they suffer, and then how can you use technology, and not always technology, but how can you do things differently to improve and answer that problem. And so 2 years on farm with growers, is understanding, man, growers are probably the smartest, most unknown scientists in the world. Every single day, growers are taking data from weather sources, from, chemical inputs, from, physically looking at their plants and what have you, and they're just doing so many calculations and converting it in their head to work out, what do I have to do today? Do I have to irrigate? No, because I think it's going to rain. Do I have to, put a chemical on? Well, I'm programmatically spraying, so I know I've got to do it in 2 days, but do I have the right window to do it? They're just constantly converting information and trying to make decisions, and they're doing it from a minimum of 5 to 7 data sources every single morning and multiple times through the day. So it was like, well, how do we help them do that better? And what are the decisions that they're trying to make, and what are the conversions that they're actually doing? So again, looking at the process, it was not just about throwing technology, because there were plenty of sensors out there that were giving data streams and dashboard access to get the data. But a lot of them had big data gaps because they're all run by 3G, 4G SIMs. So when the 3G or 4G SIM was lost, and most of us will know most of the regions that our growers are in have shitty connection. They don't always have good, access to telco. So it's a huge factor. So if you're losing chunks of data, it's not reliable, and therefore you don't trust it, and you stop using it anyway. So we said, well, that's the first problem that actually has to get fixed before we do anything. We need to be able to give a strong supply of data. And so we created a whole on-farm network. And I always say this, and Ros, our founder, will say it even stronger than I will. We never wanted to get into hardware. It is a mug's game. It is costly, it is timely, it adds so much overhead to your business. But if we didn't provide a data source that actually, gave good quality data with no gaps in it, then our solution was never going to work, because our predictions would not be accurate if we had gaps in our data. So we created a foolproof on-farm network that collects data. If the central hub that collects all of our data on-farm, if it does lose connectivity, it can store months worth of data. Now, if we don't get comms back after months, I think we've got bigger problems than whether to irrigate or not. So once it gets connectivity back, it then pushes it all back into our system, runs everything from the last data point it had, and becomes accurate, and then we start presenting the data again. So in all of the couple of years that we've had the sites running, we've only ever had one gateway go down, and it was because somebody unplugged the gateway. So other than that, we've had no issues, and the hardware, the problem we've had is tractors running over it. So how we make it highly visible and where we place it and education and everything is probably the key thing there. So, but once we had that, we have then been able to transform. And again, it's not about doing the same things digitally. It's been about understanding what is it that growers are doing and how can we give it to them better. I'm not going to go into a big product demo. It's more about kind of telling you of not just looking at the one thing they're asking for you to do, but looking at all the way back down. How do I start back here that then gives me that capability to move forward? Excuse me. So ultimately, we provide, an application connected to that data source. That data source is our bread and butter of being able to deliver this, but it's not actually what our value prop is, in a way, if that makes sense. So again, the transformation is not always about what you're trying to achieve. You might need these other steps in the background that are actually going to help you. That's it. Are there any questions?
I've got a question. If you've got a number of properties within the same region, are you then able to, with their consensus, link up to get more of a landscape scale sense of what's going on?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way that the technology works is the gateway can go up to 32 square kilometres out, and so you can have as many nodes connected as you want. And yeah, if you want to share that gateway, and whether it's a community, so we've got one group in Tasmania that they use one gateway, they've all got individual nodes, but they all use the collective data to get a better view of the area, so you absolutely can.
Yes, just down here. Neil.
Hiya. I was just wondering, in terms of your communications platform, does it use existing infrastructure in terms of telco sites and stuff, or does it have its own satellite link, or is it the kind of low broadband, low power internet that we've heard a lot about?
Yeah, so the on-farm network itself, so we use 6LoWPAN, which is the low power, low broadband that you're talking about. So on-farm, that's the radio frequency that we use to get to our gateway, so all of the nodes. And the reason we do that is because the nodes are solar powered, because they're often going to be not near power, and you want them to be able to transmit the data continually and get through a whole day. So we've trialled them like in the dark depths of Tasmania winter and know that they can go 3.5 days with no power, with no sunlight to recharge, so all that kind of thing. So that's why we selected 6LoWPAN. The gateway itself then connects into Ethernet 3G, 4G, NB-IoT, so we've forward tested it as well. We did one of the first global live examples of the NB-IoT sims, so we know that it works on all of those. There's usually somewhere that has power, power and Ethernet, so we always say Ethernet's best if you can do it, but most of them, I think 95% of what we've got are running on sims.
A couple of questions up here at the back. I'll come here. And then we'll come over to you.
Good morning. Just a question about the data that's collected. Where does it reside and who owns it?
We always get that question. So it resides in Microsoft Azure. I have declared I am ex-Microsoft, but it was already on Microsoft platform before I joined. So it does sit in Microsoft Azure, which is one of the highest security environments that you can from a cloud perspective. So who owns the data? Whoever owns the hardware owns the data. So what we use the data, there's two things. We always ask, can we supply the data to R&D, to universities that we work with for R&D purposes? And you can say yes or no, and it's always anonymised data if we do that. So we do ask that question because obviously the more data we can give to the universities to develop disease models and all that, the more that goes back into our product to add value. But that is a checkbox and you say yes or no. And then in the product, when we run all of our machine learning and algorithms and everything for the predictions, we do roll it up a level to do so that the models learn better about all case scenarios. So if you have this weather pattern coming up to here, then you know that broccoli is going to grow 2 days faster for the next growth stage kind of thing. So we do roll it up to use it from a predictive perspective, but it's always the data is your data, you own it, you can take it at any time, and we do not share it with anybody else unless that R&D perspective.
Good morning. I agree that these type of monitoring tools are essential for increased productivity, but also the other environmental drivers that this industry faces. Give us your thoughts on how we can increase the uptake of these type of tools, perhaps speak to us about the hardware limitations or the pricing and other drivers that you think are important.
Yeah, so look, I always think the biggest challenge we have as a business at the moment is the cost of the hardware. Are we significantly dearer than other products? No, because no other products kind of do what we do, so we kind of have a bit of an entry point. But we've worked out ways to bundle to get a minimum set of hardware in that will give you the biggest breadth of capability in our solution, which is all around evapotranspiration, so irrigation, disease, and forecasting, and chemical spray inventory as well. So I think price point is something people are getting their heads around. In Australia, we're lucky there's really good tax incentives for up to the price barrier of what we are to get 100% rebate, but I know that that's only in Australia. The biggest question we get when people, because everybody loves what we show them. We spent 2 years building it with growers, so we know that growers want it and it makes sense to them. The biggest question we get is, why can't you just use my hardware? I've already invested in the hardware, can't we just use that? But we just can't because of that data quality. So in oysters, as I was saying, we're above 95% accuracy 5 days out with the predictions that we do. And that's because we've had consistent data for coming up to 2 years now. The models have learnt, and continually teach themselves what works, what doesn't work, and readjust themselves. To get that level of accuracy, we have a gap in data, then we lose that accuracy and we start again. So that's a challenge of people saying, well, I've already invested in hardware, so I don't really want to buy more. So we've looked at options of saying we lease it, over a 3-year cycle instead, which is fine. We're happy to do that. It's kind of like a phone plan, so at the end of the 3 years, if we've got new model hardware, you can swap it and get that. So that was always how we intended to go to market. So we're starting to move back to that model as well to kind of jump over that barrier. And then the other kind of, challenge you get is whilst people understand the value in the software, sometimes it's like, well, when will I get my return on the investment? How long is it going to take? And it's kind of like, how long is a piece of string? But it's also a bit about, insurance. We all hate paying for insurance, but gosh, we're glad we have it when we need it. And that's the same for the oyster grower example. If they got closed when they shouldn't have been closed, and it was their peak period, Chinese New Year or whatever, to sell oysters in, and they've lost $350,000 over 2 weeks, then paying $20,000 for the system is nothing. So that's kind of one of the other things where we're building, case studies to explain those kind of things. Have I answered the question? Cool.
Is there any liability? What happens if, for example, your system says it's good and it's not with the oysters? I'm just curious around that.
Yeah. So, we have very good contracts. But look, we say we are a prediction, with the salinity reading is that, and in government, because obviously it's a regulatory board, so they can't be wrong. They have to have some level of liability on us. So what we commit to is we do physical salinity readings and calibrate our sensors against that every 3 months, and our sensors have never fallen out of range in 2 years. So, but we do have rules on us to test and make sure to ensure that.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Yes, down the back.
Getting your step count today.
I am. I'm totally working off that breakfast. It's great. Love a little bit of bacon hash.
A number of farms I'm involved with, we have a number of sensors on farms provided by different companies. And one of the issues I have is that each of those sensors has their own telemetry system, their own data recording system, and essentially farmers are paying several times for the components of that monitoring system. What are your comments around how we might? And I think one of the real impediments to this sensing technology really taking off is just the complexity of the whole thing. It seems to me there's a real opportunity for the aggregation of aspects of the collection and the management of that data.
Yeah.
But I don't see that happening in this country. What's your experience of that, and how might we improve that?
Yeah, and look, it's a great question, and one of the things from our perspective we often get asked, can't you just ingest the data that we have from these other tools? And so whilst we say at this point in time we're not going to do that because of the data quality, we know that realistically people have invested money, they do have all these multiple data streams and everything, so how can we make the most of them? So we are looking in the future roadmap of how we integrate other data sets so that people can leverage the assets that they've already created, and then how do we represent in the solution to say, well, you're using this, so therefore how do we visualise the lower confidence level in the prediction? We aren't as confident in these predictions because it's coming from an external data source, but we'll still give it to you, kind of thing. So that's one way we're looking at mitigating it. But actually the biggest challenge that we have is nobody wants to sell their data, or nobody wants to open up that data stream. So data is, the next oil, right? It's like everybody knows that the more data you have, the more decisions you can make, or the more influence you can have, or what have you. So how do we convince Mate to allow us to have an API in, to bring it into our system, to make irrigation easier? So when our system says, we think you need to put 2 mils on today, that you can then just push a button and it tells Mate to go and do it, and then collects that data back in so that our predictions are more accurate because we know it happened. It's actually about people allowing you to have that open layer to do integration. We are 100% open platform, so we can ingest data from anybody, we can connect to anybody that will allow us to. We always did that because we didn't want to be everything to everybody. We wanted to do what we do really well and leverage the other people that already are key players in different areas of the business. But yeah, I think it comes down to, is somebody going to allow us to use that data, for example?
Would that come from consumer demand by customers saying, look, I've got your system in here, if you want me to keep it, open it up so I can use it with these other platforms?
Yeah, so we're working with a big grower at the moment, and they want us to do, because of the way they do irrigation, they irrigate every hour and they fertigate as well. So it's like, you know, they don't want to be entering the irrigation every hour, they just want it to be transparent. And they, across their main crop, they use 2 different irrigation systems. And we've approached both and said, can we integrate? Oh, not sure. And they said, well, you can make the decision, we can go one, you know, who will integrate, and because they're big enough, they'll probably have an influence on it. So, but it will come down to consumer demand.
Back here.
The other thing while you're walking up there, which is of interest, is we're working with a company at the moment that is all about IoT, which is what the sensors are. And it's about saying, you know, if I'm a grower and I've got, you know, 20 different sensors on my farm, let me connect them to this IoT marketplace and allow people to buy my data. If they're interested in weather data in the Central Otago for tourism or for whatever, you know, let them buy the data and then you earn money for the data that you have. You know, so there's different things that are coming about in the marketplace that will allow you to actually own money if you put your hand up to do it.
My question is related to what the other gentleman said. Would you be willing to open your data to other providers?
Yep. So we have the capability to. Technically, that's how we architected our solution, so that we can. And we are talking to organisations at the moment about two-way flow of data so that it can go into other systems. A lot of it's about on-farm management decision. In enterprise, we're looking at rolling up the data for a corporate level. So if you've got a corporate grower that has, you know, 150 farms and they want to see that whole view, you know, and then they want to incorporate it into enterprise, you know, ERP systems and that. So yeah, definitely we will. And at the end of the day, the data is yours, so you can also, you know, put your data where you want.
I find that at our farm, electronics is the biggest frustration in our farm now. It's not the physical stuff, right through from vehicles where I used about 3 combine harvesters ago, I could bloody fix everything on it. Now you've got to plug in a laptop and it's going to cost you $5,000 to change anything. But that's just the physical part of it. It's also around the recording part of it. I've just been counting up, and I think I've got 9 different digital maps of my farm being used by different places, either being used by fertiliser companies or irrigation schemes or tractors or whatever. And none of them, well, almost none of them talk to each other. And if I take your system on, I'll have 10. So.
What's your name and number so I can come see?
So, how do we get, and to me it seems as though electronics, because of that, is basically immature still. It hasn't matured to the state where we've got common platforms right across. How far away are we from that? Because at the moment, trying to get various parts to link together is, well, I've been talking to some people at this conference about that, and they haven't got answers. They don't know they can do it. But the information is there, and it's just got to be linked.
And this is actually, you know, a good segue into what the title of this is, right? It's for digital transformation in agriculture from hype to reality. You know, I think we're past the hype now. I think we know that it's there and we're part way there, but we're not all the way there, right? It's not reality yet because there is still all these frustrations. There is all these disparate systems still. So even with ours, even though, you know, a lot of the growers that we've worked with have got rid of other systems based on that we can do what those systems do, so they might have actually consolidated a bit. There's still other systems that we can't and don't integrate into at the moment. You just said the classic example, because one of the things you have to do to set our system up is draw the block. You know, well, everybody's got that somewhere in some other system. So we actually allow you to upload it from another system if you already have it. So we're trying to make those steps easier, but, you know, it's got to be across the board. There's got to be some commonality. So there's still a lot of maturing to do in the business. I guess the other thing which is slightly different, but you touched on is, you know, from a hardware perspective, and this goes back to the question up the back, you know, I started by saying all growers have hardware sitting in the shed that they don't use, either because it's too expensive to fix or it's, you know, they don't know how to fix it or what have you. The solution, so what we did in the solution, again, right, is about transformation. It wasn't just about coming up with the right hardware. It was saying, you know what, we are going to have to install it and we are going to have to maintain it. And so we don't just sell you hardware and deliver it to you. We actually show up with an installer, with an agronomist that works out where's the best place to go in the field. We have smarts built into it to monitor it, to tell us if something's going wrong with it, so we know before you do, and we come out and we fix it. So, because we don't want the data to be wrong, so we have to make sure it works, so we take that, away from you. So it's all these different things from that transformation perspective, but the biggest disparity we still have is just all these systems that don't talk to each other and don't leverage each other. And that's what we're really trying to push at the moment, working with us, even our perceived competitors, we are meeting with them and working with them on how do we do it better.
That's really just the time that we're in, isn't it? It's just that sort of little stage. More questions? Yeah.
Just a quick comment on how do you think we get to these issues that have just been raised? Is it a regulatory regime, or was it just a demand like Radar's suggesting? How, in your view, do we go forward to actually bring this about? Because unless somebody stands up and takes some initiative, it's never going to happen, is it?
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think it has to come from the top down. I think it has to come from either the large corporate growers that are insisting and have this, this kind of more, not advanced view, but like they're making decisions in other areas of a business that, are similar. And so I think pushing it down that way, but then also pushing it down, through, for example, if you look at the Tasmanian, like the oyster industry that we've done, so now across Australia we've changed policy, we've changed how it works, and it's coming through one system now for both parties getting value. So it's working out how do we do that in agriculture, so whether it's working with the biggest suppliers of irrigation systems, chem companies, what have you, although everybody panics when I say that one, but I mean in the most positive way of working with them, to get the most value out and integration point. So I think it has to come with working with the large enterprise growers and the large companies that are supplying into ag in one way or another and saying, how do we do it better?
Or indeed, lobby groups like Irrigation New Zealand.
We actually, one of the things on transformation that I did miss in there, I did proviso that I'm not that well today, but it is that next step again. So we're talking about what we do on farm now. We're actually, and I know this is relevant to what you guys experience here, is we have a couple of irrigation schemes in Tassie and Vic and New South Wales that we're looking at if the growers along the irrigation scheme have our system so that we can predict their water usage and their water requirements, because we know when they're going to need to irrigate, not based on our predictions, and put flow meters into the rivers that are being fed, because it's slightly different to yours, that we can then start predicting usage and checkpoints and everything on there. So we're building out that next phase of transforming again the next level of irrigation, based on the foundations that we have there. So that will, again, probably come from a top-down, bureaucratic, this is the way we want to do things now, so kind of dictate a few different things in that.
Marvellous. Any other pressing questions? Well then, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Felicity. Thank you, Felicity. Fascinating. And as you saw on the previous screen as well, a massive thank you to Irricon, who sponsored this particular session. So what a round of applause for Irricon as well. And if you did have some plates or some little muesli bowls, if you just wouldn't mind taking them back to the back, and then if anyone wants to have a chat about Ukrainian tractor hackers, more than happy in terms of digital hacking of tractors and your intellectual property, machinery your own. I'm fascinated by that at the moment. So hey, again, please a round of applause for Felicity. We start again in about 15 minutes.